What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Tavern Talk by Initial Reaction. I'm Philip, and this week, instead of reviewing the newest, biggest release of the week, we're going to talk about a couple different new releases and upcoming releases because we're getting into award season. There's a lot of smaller movies that have already come out that you probably heard a lot about. There's a lot of smaller movies that are coming up that we won't get a chance to review on the regular weekly show. So we wanted to just take a chance and try to touch on some of these smaller movies that we may have not otherwise got to talk about. So without further ado, let's jump into some of the smaller movies that have already come out but might still be playing in your area, and that, for the most part, I'd highly recommend.
부모님 얼굴도 뵙고 좋더라. 건강들 하시고.
일거리가 없으셔도.
네가 내 대신 얘 과외 선생님 좀 해줘라. 영어.
대학생인 척하라는 거야?
구라를 좀 치지 뭐.
First up is Parasite. This movie should be playing in at least one or two of your smaller art house theaters. Still, if not, I imagine it'll be on streaming services or VOD where you can rent it fairly soon, definitely before the Academy Awards early next year. But Parasite comes from director Bong Joon-ho. He is from South Korea. He directed Snowpiercer and Okja. Okja's on Netflix if you have a subscription to that. But it is a film that I didn't know anything about going in. It is a South Korean film, so there are subtitles. Those are really easy to get past because even though I had no idea what I was walking into, I was immediately taken into this world where I don't want to say too much. I don't want to spoil too much because I do think it is best to go in cold. But it covers a multitude of genres. It's kind of this dark comedy. But it definitely has some thriller aspects to it as well. Some of the sequences in here are some of the most tension-filled sequences I've seen all year. But it really is the story about class, the rich and the poor, the difference in the rich and the poor, and how they operate in these two vastly different worlds, and what kind of happens when one infiltrates another. It's really interesting stuff. Like I said, it has this kind of sly dark comedy element to it that provides a little bit of a social commentary. But it's just a well-rounded movie. It has, it encompasses a lot of genres and does them really well. I really enjoyed it. It's not what I expected, but I didn't know what to expect. So again, definitely go in cold. And if you pay attention to kind of smaller films, what the critics are raving about out of the festival circuit, things like that, I'm sure you've heard about Parasite, and I'm sure you've heard the hype around it. But going in, that's the only kind of context I had, and it didn't just kind of meet those expectations. It definitely exceeded them for me. Parasite's probably going to be in my top 10. It's one of my favorite movies I've seen this year. I would give it 4.5 out of 5 if we're talking star rating, so highly recommend checking out Parasite.
Hey, Jojo, my old friend.
Hi, Adolf.
What's wrong, little man?
They call me a scared rabbit.
Let them say whatever they want. People used to say a lot of nasty things about me. Oh, this guy's a lunatic. Oh, look at that psycho. He's gonna get us all killed.
Next, we have Jojo Rabbit, another one you probably heard a lot about if you pay attention to film sites or festivals or just smaller kind of director-driven features. This comes from Taika Waititi. He directed What We Do in the Shadows, Hunt for the Wilder People, and of course Thor Ragnarok. This is his new film. He wrote it, he directed it, he stars in it, so he is all in on this one. And if you haven't heard about it, it's kind of a tough movie to describe. It's about a little boy in 1940s Germany who is part of the Hitler Youth. He's really enthusiastic about being part of Hitler's army, and as his imaginary friend is Adolf Hitler himself, played by Taika Waititi. But it's kind of just this big, really creative but rather elaborate way of teaching a basic lesson in morality. It's kind of billed itself as the anti-hate satire. And so there's this very difficult line to walk of humor and darkness and the reality of what happened in World War II and what the Nazis did. But where it is really winning is how it balances those. The only downside for Jojo Rabbit to me is that it just feels like it's missing something. Like, it has so much going for it. The kids who are in it are great, especially Thomas and Mackenzie. If there's any kind of awards talk around it, I could see screenplay and maybe a supporting actress nom for Thomasin McKenzie. She's really, really good in it. But the supporting cast all around it is really good. You got Scarlett Johansson, Sam Rockwell, Rebel Wilson, Stephen Merchant. So a lot of good, kind of comedy, comedians here, but also, you've got Scarlett Johansson who delivers one scene that just kind of really strikes that balance in showing you how dramatic and deep it can be, while other scenes with like Merchant and Waititi himself are just ridiculously humorous. So I really liked Jojo Rabbit. I don't want it to come off like I didn't. I came out of it wanting a little bit more from it, though. A little bit more of that Taika Waititi quirkiness, weirdness that he is known for in his general personality. So I liked it. I didn't love it. I wasn't as crazy about it as some people have been, but it's a wholehearted recommendation at 4 out of 5 stars. I would definitely say seek out Jojo Rabbit if it's still playing near you. Okay, next up is the movie where I'm probably going to differ the most from the majority. I wasn't a huge fan of The Witch when it came out in 2016, but I'm even less of a fan of The Lighthouse, I'd have to say. It's not necessarily that it wasn't what I expected. I think director Robert Eggers is a talented artist. There's no doubt that he's a very kind of specific artist, a specific director who has a very clear vision of what he wants to do and what he wants to accomplish. But coming out of The Lighthouse, it just kind of felt like an exercise in indulgence. I didn't really get much out of it. I don't know. I mean, I understand that it's supposed to be this portrait of like a descension into madness. And I did have a little bit of fun, like watching Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe kind of ham it up and have fun playing out these ridiculous scenarios they're kind of thrown into. And it's got some really, really just gorgeous as far as visuals. You can tell a lot of time and thought and effort was put into that, and I don't want to discredit that aspect of it. But just as far as narrative goes and storytelling, I was never captivated or compelled by it.
Very often I have the atmosphere of the film in my head before I have the story.
And for that reason alone, I just kind of was not a big fan of what it was doing. So for me, I'm in the minority on The Lighthouse. I would go 2.5 out of 5 on that. But if it's your thing, it might just be a subject matter thing. I don't know if black and white German expressionism is your deal. You might enjoy this 10 times more than I did, but I don't know that I'd ever revisit this one. So 2.5 out of 5 for The Lighthouse for me. All right, so we're going to move on to some Netflix original releases. If you've been paying attention at all, Netflix has put a big foot forward as far as awards contenders. You've got films this year like Dolomite Is My Name with Eddie Murphy. You've got Steven Soderbergh's The Laundromat, and you've got Noah Baumbach's Marriage Story, which we'll talk about here in just a second. But probably the biggest of them all this year is Martin Scorsese's The Irishman. It was easily one of my most anticipated of the year. It is now streaming on Netflix as of last week. If you haven't heard about this, it's the story of Frank Sheeran, who's played by Robert De Niro. This is kind of a reunion of sorts for Scorsese and De Niro and Joe Pesci, and then you get the added bonus of Al Pacino, who somehow Martin Scorsese had never worked with before. But it's the story of Frank Sheeran. It's based on a book, I Heard You Paint Houses, that Sheeran helped. It's kind of based on his confessions and interviews with him. And he goes to work for Russell Bufalino, also went on to become good friends with Jimmy Hoffa. Between those two relationships, he kind of navigates the waters of the Italian mob in Philadelphia. It spans several decades. There's been a lot of talk about the de-aging around De Niro and Pesci and Pacino. It ultimately comes to be about, what is the point of all this? It is kind of Scorsese's magnum opus as far as these gangster movies are concerned. It is 3.5 hours. There are ways to break it up into kind of an episodic deal if you need to watch it that way. But if you can, sit and watch it without interruption and kind of just all the way through, it doesn't feel like 3.5 hours. That was kind of my main takeaway. That was kind of the thing that struck me as the most as the biggest achievement, I guess you could say. Scorsese in his last few films has been more reflective about his subjects, and it only seems fitting that he kind of lends this treatment to this genre that has kind of defined a fair portion of his career. And a lot of the good things you can say about The Irishman seem to be obvious. Like the acting is obviously great. The period detail, the sets, camera work, that's all great. It's what you expect from a Martin Scorsese movie. It's fantastic. But like I said, the biggest achievement here is that Scorsese and longtime editor Thelma Schoonmaker make the 3.5-hour runtime just kind of breeze by. Every time, every line, every flashback, there are like layers of flashbacks in here, and it very easily could have gotten lost in all of this narrative that it's kind of condensing into a through-line story. I just sat there and was kind of engrossed in it and captivated by it, and I would highly recommend seeing it. Like, I don't know that it is a masterpiece, as some have kind of hailed it to be, but it's on par with anything else Scorsese, the best work that Scorsese has done throughout his career. So definitely highly recommend. I would go with a 4 out of 5 for The Irishman, which you can check out now on Netflix. So do it.
He likes to talk, don't he?
Next is another Netflix original feature that is actually on Netflix now. It premiered on Netflix today. It's called Marriage Story. It is the latest from writer-director Noah Baumbach, who you might know from Frances Ha or The Squid and the Whale or While We're Young. It stars Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver, and is very autobiographical in the sense that Adam Driver could essentially be playing Noah Baumbach, I think. And Marriage Story is a love story, but it's kind of a love story told through the lens of divorce. It takes these two people we come to know on a very precise and personal level. We then watch fall further and further away from one another and go through this kind of rigmarole of the divorce process and how impersonal that becomes. But, it's one of those movies that's kind of about the performances. This is about how big Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson are able to go and what they're able to put on display. And in that regard, yeah, it's really satisfying. It's emotional. They have a child together, so there's that facet of it. But the thing that kind of draws back on Marriage Story is that Baumbach, all of his work really has this kind of like privileged academic, fully immersed, this art world and people existing in that bubble. And so there's kind of this lack of a sense of like everyday life for real people outside that world, and that's the same here. So while yes, there are some raw emotions on display, I think like the environment and the circumstances in which these characters exist could have been more raw as well. For that reason, I would go 3.5 out of 5 on Marriage Story. I can't say I necessarily enjoyed watching it, but it is very riveting, and again, the performances are worth a glimpse alone. So 3.5 out of 5 for Marriage Story for me. If you have Netflix, definitely check it out on there. It should be streaming now.
I thought we should talk.
Okay. I don't know how to start.
All right, well, that is it for this week on Initial Reaction. Be sure to let us know in the comments if, when you see these movies, if you've seen any of them, what you thought, what you think has, strong chances in the Oscar race this year. Definitely excited to hear your thoughts. As always, be sure to hit the subscribe button there, hit the little notification bell to get notifications for when a new video is uploaded. You can catch written reviews for some of these ones that we don't do videos for on my website at reviewsfromabed.com. But that's it for this week. Thanks for checking us out. Thanks for checking us out always. Thank you to Movie Tavern for letting us come in here and shoot the show and watch the movies. We'll be back next week, but until then, peace.